You're listening to the Wired for Impact podcast. What is XRP? Why does it exist? Why is it valuable? Why is there so much excitement around that? We'll start with that just to give a broad overview, and then we can kind of dive in.
Sure. So the way I found XRP is about a year and a half ago. I had an education crypto program teaching women how to invest. And I went through all the major blockchains in order: Bitcoin, Ethereum, blah, blah, blah. And XRP was in the sort of like top 5, but all the people that were talking about crypto that I was listening to never mentioned it. So I actually passed over it initially because I was recommended to focus on some of these other ones like Avalanche, Phantom, all that stuff. But then I kept sort of saying, well, if I'm going to do this, I might as well go through the whole list. And I started to research XRP. And almost immediately, I found 2 very strange things. One was this scandal called ETHgate, which I was like, wow, this is juicy. And then kind of related to that was this thing called the XRP buyback proposal. And I was like, what is these 2 things are nothing like any of the other blockchains that I have gone through. And so my curiosity was completely engrossed in what is ETHgate and what does it have to do with this XRP buyback? Who's going to buy that? Someone's going to buy my XRP. Mm-hmm. And it sort of started this very, very long rabbit hole journey. So XRP is a layer 1 blockchain, just like Ethereum or Bitcoin, in that it is kind of a base layer. And it was created, according to the founders, to be a better Bitcoin. That Bitcoin is a very revolutionary way to send money from one person to another. There is no counterparty risk in the same way that there is with like a Federal Reserve IOU fiat money. But Bitcoin has a couple of drawbacks, namely that it's expensive to send money. So if I was a company and had 10,000 employees, to pay them all via Bitcoin would rack up some pretty hefty fees. It's also pretty slow. Like if I'm standing in your store to pay you and you don't let me leave with the stuff until I've given you the money, and it takes like 10 minutes for that transaction to go through, it's kind of an awkward situation. So XRP solves some of the problems around speed and cost so that it could be a more viable payments method for the global marketplace.
And now, real quick, the reason for that is just the technology underneath it, correct? So because again, most people are thinking of crypto assets as sort of one and all the same. And so can you explain a little bit of why it's so much faster?
Sure.
Versus
so the way blockchain works is there are accounting ledgers, kind of databases around accounting transactions, credits and debits that exist on a series of computers. Now, for Bitcoin, what they do is they have many, many copies that all exist on tons of computers, and all those copies have to match up. And that's this process of validating. There's also this process in Bitcoin where new tokens are mined when the blockchain is updated. And that is how new tokens are created. And that process for Bitcoin specifically requires a lot of energy, and it takes time for this updating and validating of the ledger to happen. So it takes a while. XRP, all of the XRP that will ever be created has been created. The total cap is 100 billion. So there's no mining of XRP. And they chose a consensus protocol called kind of the Byzantine, it's related to the Byzantine generals problem. It's just a more resource efficient way to get consensus that these transactions are accurate. So it happens faster, and because there's no mining, there's no incentive to be a validator. You're just kind of doing it to support the network. So there isn't you're not paying miners to do anything.
Okay, makes sense. And so why so much excitement around the project? I mean, you and I have been living, breathing this for a while, but for those that are still sort of catching up to speed, why is this one different than some of the other projects? Why so much excitement?
The great irony for me with XRP was that I kind of got into this whole world as sort of an anti-banking thing. Like I read Creature from Jekyll Island, found about the incredible corruption with central banks and the sort of scam of fiat. And crypto seems to be like an alternative to that, like a way out of this sort of fiat prison of sorts, this sort of slavery system, right? And then you kind of come across Ripple, and Ripple is a company that is building software on the XRP ledger. And they wanted to figure out, how can we get our software adopted? Well, who moves money most? Who's the most likely type of entity that would pay us to use our service? And the answer was banks. So Ripple looks like at surface level, like they're sort of part of this banking establishment. And so if you get into crypto to be anti-banking and then you get into XRP, it creates this sort of conflict of like, wait a minute, which team am I on here? Yeah. But through that process, in my effort to try to figure out, like, is Ripple a good guy here or is Ripple a bad guy here? I've uncovered that there is an entire new financial system that has been built and is planned for us. It will rely on money that lives on the blockchain called digital assets. I actually don't really like the word crypto anymore because it got this kind of connotation of sort of scammy, get rich quick stuff. So all of the money that I'm referring to, we call them digital assets. They will live on the blockchain, and the way we send money back and forth will change. It will become much faster. It will enable lots of new business models. And Ripple, the company, is kind of pioneering or pushing for the adoption of this particular blockchain, this layer one, to be used to start with banks, and then it will hit businesses, and then it will hit all sorts of use cases peer-to-peer as well. I think
this whole story, this whole XRP / Ripple / what we're going to get into here in a second with the SEC is such a fascinating drama. If you're just sitting on the sidelines watching this is going to make incredible movies in the future, because so much is going on right now that the average person is just not in tune with. And I'm like, man, you guys are missing an incredible show right now. It's absolutely, and what's hanging in the balance is monumental. And so I'm wanting to inject a little excitement into this and some energy into this whole space for my listeners so that they can get more on board with the potential opportunities here. And who knows, maybe it all goes away. Obviously, anything crypto / digital assets, you just don't know. But so give us a little bit of perspective into the controversy. Why is there so much controversy? And explain what's going on with the SEC, which that there's a whole podcast we could probably do on that alone, to be honest.
Sure. So let's talk about ETHgate. That is, I think, the heart of the controversy, the heart of this SEC lawsuit. And I think there will be a movie made of it. I actually have plans, they're not quite underway yet, to write a book about ETHgate.
Okay.
Because it is, I think, the Watergate / Kennedy assassination of our lifetime. And I'll just kind of give you a nutshell about what happened. Is that there's a lot of problems with the current financial system. It takes a lot of money to store money and move money globally. There's a lot of inefficiency. And when blockchain technology first came out, it was pretty clear that this could be the answer. But banks are very slow to move. They need trust. They're not an innovative industry at all. So here's how I kind of see it had it happen. And I'm going to just summarize it. Ripple, as a smart startup fintech company in California, comes up with this idea to revolutionize cross-border payments, how money is moved from one country to another. But they know that they need the bank's buy-in. So they go to JP Morgan and they say, hey, we got this idea. We want to create this service. Will you be our client? And JP Morgan's like, well, and there's some assumptions here on my part. JP Morgan's like, well, we would, but the way this works is that we have to own half of you, or a significant portion. Like, if you want to play in our little banking cartel, then we get to own you. And it seemed like maybe Ripple said no to all of it, or they just couldn't agree on how much. So Ripple was kind of like, no, thanks. We will find another way. And JP Morgan, in essence, was like, yeah, that's not cool. And so they created a rival product, which is Ethereum, and they invested heavily in ETH. There's a lot of covert activity around how ETH was funded, kind of through this company called Consensus. And they had what's called an ICO, like similar to an IPO with stocks, but they launched all these ICO tokens on the ETH network with a great many disguised whales, anonymous accounts that were able to buy in. And what it looks like from the external level is that JP Morgan, because they couldn't get in on the XRP Ripple situation, invested heavily in a rival to try to beat XRP. And they needed some time. So they had the SEC sue Ripple and drag out this lawsuit for 2 years so that their product could have a shot at capturing the market. It hasn't worked. ETH has some really great qualities to it, but it's very expensive. It's quite slow. It's not really suitable for cross-border payments. That's why all these layer twos like Polygon and Arbitrum have been built, but they're not as good as a layer one that is fast and efficient. So that is sort of the theory behind ETHgate, is that the banking cartel, because they couldn't get a large enough piece of Ripple, had their boys sue Ripple. And this guy named Jay Clayton was the head of the SEC, and he did it on his last day at work before he left the job, files this lawsuit, walks out, And then there was sort of this very vague period where there was nobody really in charge. It was an interim person who kind of changed some of the rules that made no sense. And people who, and I'm not a securities lawyer or know anything about that, but people who are in that space, like Jimmy, they were like, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. There's a lot of things that are just totally illogical about this lawsuit, that there's something more to this story because this doesn't make sense. And generally when the SEC sues people, they want a quick win so they can go brag about it and take the money and show how good they are at protecting people from these terrible investing opportunities.
Right.
And so the fact that they've been dragging this case out seems kind of counterintuitive. Like if you have a really good case, like you want to push for it to be a win, and they have stalled at a lot of opportunities.
And for those paying attention, the stall, like you said, it's like shenanigans. I mean, I'm not an expert in this whole thing, but the headlines that I'm seeing, the articles and the little podcast clips that I'm seeing here and there, it just sounds like the SEC is it's part. I mean, in theory, the SEC exists to provide protection, to provide regulations around securities, i.e. stocks for companies, so that people don't do shady stuff. But one of the crux of the controversies around this is that whether or not XRP, the digital asset, is a security that the SEC can even regulate in the first place. And that's
correct.
That in and of itself
that I've learned
about
that
falls apart.
Is a thing can't be a security. Even if you go back to the Howey test from the 1930s, the 1940s, oranges were not the security, and neither were the orange groves. If you're not familiar with the Howey test, this was a lawsuit back in 1944, 55, where an orange grove owner sold shares in his orange grove to people to raise money so that he could grow more oranges, and then people would get a cut of the profits. The security was the investment contract, the agreement. If you buy my orange trees, you will be a part owner of this business, and then I will share the profits with you. With something like XRP, like there's no investment contract. Like it's a digital asset, it's software code that lives on the blockchain. What am I agreeing to get if I buy it? I could hope that I get profits, but there is no agreement. So the idea that some people assume is that, well, Ripple owns a lot of this XRP, so you're by default signing an agreement with them. That's actually not true. You can buy private equity with Ripple on Link2 and actually buy shares in the company that have nothing to do with XRP. There are other businesses and other projects that have built on the XRP ledger that have nothing to do with Ripple. People also have bought XRP tokens without ever having heard of Ripple. And Ripple could go out of business tomorrow. They're just a company, right?
Well, and XRP pre-existed Ripple. XRP Correct. As a digital asset existed even before the company was around.
There's a commonality in that the people who created the XRP ledger now most of them went to start Ripple. So it was called OpenCoin. There was a different company before. There was other people involved. And those founders gifted all this XRP to Ripple when the company was started. So there is like a connection there, but Ripple, the company, did not issue XRP. And generally, when you are if you have a stock in your company that is a security, you are, as the company, issue that stock. You are the issuer of it. And that is not the case with Ripple and XRP. So there's also, the SEC is also alleging that secondary sales of XRP are securities, which means I go to Coinbase or whatever, to Binance, and I buy some XRP. And then, Peter, I sell it to you. And if you were to buy that for me, according to what the SEC says, that's a security transaction where I have no say in the profits of XRP or Ripple. And this agreement between us, if I'm using it as a payment currency to pay you for something, is the investment contract around? Like neither of us are in any way tied to the success of the XRP ledger as a whole. So there's a lot of things that just don't add up. And it's an incredibly significant case for crypto and the blockchain, because if Ripple loses, it's going to create a lot of problems for a lot of other crypto assets, specifically ETH and many, many other ones that have use cases that are utility and potentially store of value. Ripple wins, it will be the only digital asset with clarity in the court system that it is not a security. So even if you're not interested in XRP and Ripple, which you should be if you ever spend money anywhere, the industry is we're waiting at the edge of our seats. And the industry too, I mean, I interact with a lot of people in this community now. Like stress is high. Like this case has been just dragging on for a very long time. And I haven't even been in it for the full 2 years that so many very patient, dedicated XRP hodlers have been. And we're ready for it to end.
again, so to me, when I zoom out and look at the drama of all this, when you really factor in, if you've been digging and doing a little bit of research, if you've read Creature from Jekyll Island, if you understand the banking cartel and how massive this is, so much really does pinpoint on this case, because at least as I understand it from the outside looking in at arm's length, the SEC is sort of old guard. And they've been trying to, they're playing games to, like you said, to stall so that they can have a rival product that they can maintain control of, maintain the cartel. And they've kind of painted themselves in a corner because, as you said, if they do actually win, it changes everything. It creates such a mess for all these other industries, even outside of crypto, as I understand it. Like oil companies own oil. Does that mean that that's a security? It's like, where does that principle break? It doesn't. So if that principle applies at Ripple and XRP, then it has to apply in these other places. And I don't think they really can afford to do that. Thank you for listening to this episode of Wired for Impact. If you're interested in creating and expanding your impact, be sure to visit us online at impactnow.com.